The Ark of the Covenant, an all-powerful artifact thought lost to history. But is it possible that it was stolen by the Roman legions? Ancient documents and legends say it could still be in Rome. Now a team of experts is on a quest, exploring catacombs.
Archon means the one taking care of the Ark.
And investigating secret societies.
You could only go inside here if you were initiated into a specific mystery cult.
In a journey that takes us to the very heart of one of the world's great religions.
If the papacy did indeed have the Ark of the Covenant, that it followed them deep inside the Vatican.
Ark hunters may be on the cusp of finding the most famous treasure in history. After centuries of searching, its hiding place has been narrowed down to a handful of locations. Using the latest data and following new leads, we can reveal the secrets of the Lost Ark. The Ark of the Covenant, one of the most mysterious and coveted objects in history. It is said to be imbued with incredible power and carry the Word of God. But what became of it? Sources from Rome's imperial era and medieval times suggest that it may have been looted from Jerusalem by the Roman soldiers and kept in their capital. The bustling streets of Rome hide a wealth of history. Beneath this chaotic yet glamorous surface lie more ancient versions of this city.
To understand the city of Rome, you have to think of it as being built layer upon layer. So underneath the modern street surface of Rome, you'll find an older Rome, and beneath that, an even older Rome.
There are catacombs and tunnels and even whole streets that are underground. They don't even know in Rome, what they've got and what kind of tunnels and catacombs are going beneath that city.
So you could have a medieval church, underneath it might be a Byzantine church, underneath that will be a pagan temple, and that's typical all over Rome.
Founded in the 8th century BC and covering 500 square miles, this center of world culture has nearly 3,000 years of history crammed into its soil. Where to start looking for the trail of the Ark amongst all this history?
There's an awful lot more to find that even now people haven't found. The Ark of the Covenant might be there.
Archaeologist Darius Arya is an expert on the hidden world beneath Rome's streets. He's always been fascinated by the Ark of the Covenant. Darius starts his search for evidence in a mysterious temple that dates to the same era as the Ark's arrival in Rome. It's a temple where strange ceremonies took place.
There are so many secretive aspects, very strange rituals and practices still to be unearthed and understood from ancient Rome.
These rituals shared some aspects with the veneration of the Ark, such as the use of bull's blood. This strange temple lies next to the famous Circus Maximus. Hidden beneath a modern building, it was constructed in the 2nd century AD, not long after the Ark is said to have come to Rome with the victorious armies from Jerusalem. To investigate these moments in history, Darius needs to head deep below the city.
The site down below here transports us back to ancient Rome. This site was discovered in the 1930s, and this place has been converted into the use for a very private temple. You could only go inside here if you were initiated into a specific mystery cult.
This is a temple, or Mithraeum, to Mithras, the god at the center of this mystery cult. He was one of a number of gods, cults, and deities that inhabited the Roman religious world.
So here is a wonderfully preserved panel depicting a lot of the life and the myths of Mithras. Mithras is definitely a Persian god. We know that much for certain. And of course, underlined by his dress and his hat.
This powerful god was not just worshipped in Iran, but all across the Roman Empire.
The Romans were massively polytheistic. They worshipped a huge number of gods, in part because everywhere they invaded, they kind of sucked in the local religions. You have all these cults, the cult of Isis from Egypt, the cult of Mithras from modern Iran.
This cult's rituals, practiced here in the heart of Rome, had striking similarities to rituals performed with the Ark.
We have the central scene, the protagonist Mithras plunging his dagger into this bull. That's a huge part of the mythology. Here he is also coming out of a cave. He's born from the earth, but you see there's this one scene where he literally is dragging this bull as if he's strong, like Hercules.
These cults often revolved around something to do with the Ark of the Covenant. Whenever you take into account, like, Mithras slaughtering the bull, and we know that the preachers or the priests before the Ark of the Covenant, they would have the bull's blood.
In Judaism, the high priest was said to sprinkle bull's blood on the Ark once a year on the Day of Atonement. Could this be a clue to how the Ark came to be in Rome? Understanding the identities of the men who belong to this mysterious cult is key to establishing how this sacred treasure could have traveled from Jerusalem to Italy.
When it appears as a cult in the Roman period, it really seems to have been repackaged. And it becomes so popular with the military, it spreads like wildfire all over the empire, from Britain all the way to Syria. And a big spreader seems to be the Roman military itself.
It was this huge macho thing, this huge macho boys' club. The initiation into the various grades of Mithraism would be tough, would be very tough. They were scary and they were dangerous, highly risky. It was the macho cousin to Christianity because it arose to popularity at more or less the same time.
But Mithraism was not the only clandestine religion in the Roman Empire. It competed with other mystery cults, as well as Christianity for followers. Could the Ark also have been secretly worshipped in Rome?
If the Ark of the Covenant had been brought to Rome, it seems reasonable to assume that a cult might have developed around this unique object, which, remember, was supposed to have awesome power, apart from the fact that it was beautiful to look at and that God was supposed to live within those two cherubim on the top.
Mithraism eventually lost out to Christianity as the Roman state religion, and it faded into obscurity. But the presence of this ancient temple deep below the city shows that Romans brought back beliefs from all over the empire. In Jerusalem, archaeologist Danny Herman is looking for the truth behind the Roman sack of this city. This event would see followers of Mithras strip the temple of its treasures. And one of those may have been the Ark of the Covenant. Jerusalem was traditionally the mysterious relic's home. But in 70 AD, a Roman army was battering at the city's walls. By this time, the imperial troops had carved out a mighty empire that stretched from Hadrian's Wall in the desolate, wet hills of northern Britain to the parched wastelands of Judea. This troublesome province was in revolt, and the Emperor Vespasian had sent his son Titus to crush it. And one of the legions under his command were were followers of the mystery cult of Mithras.
What happened here in the year 70 is one of the worst tragedies in Jewish history, second only to the Holocaust.
Archaeologist Danny Herman is an expert on the First Jewish-Roman War. This conflict culminated in the bloody siege of Jerusalem and the assault on its magnificent temple.
The temple in Jerusalem in Roman times was decorated with precious items of gold and silver, and also was a big treasury of the temple tax that the priests would gather from the public by biblical law. It's amounting about 8 to 10 million people at that time, each male giving a shekel to the temple treasury every year. That's an obscene amount of money that is gathered here at that time.
All this loot would have been irresistible for the Roman legions. But were they after something more valuable than gold? In addition to carrying the Word of God, the Ark was said to have been imbued with deadly electrical power.
The Ark of the Covenant, as we know from the Old Testament, was effectively a weapon of mass destruction. And you can imagine the Romans being a very martial, militaristic lot, that if they got their hands on the Ark of the Covenant, the prospect of having this weapon that could just wipe out their enemies on the battlefield, well, that would have been way too tempting.
If the Ark of the Covenant was still in the temple in Jerusalem in 70 AD, you have to wonder, would it have still been a functioning electrical device that would electrocute people, or was it by now just sort of a gold statue of two cherubim, which would have been very valuable?
The Jewish defenders fought with everything they had. The survival of their very culture was at stake. And for 5 tortuous months, the siege dragged on. But finally, the Romans breached the walls, and the slaughter and destruction began. It was a disaster for the Jewish people.
The temple, which was right behind me, was razed to the ground. It was put in fire and completely burnt down.
The Romans literally not just torched it, they took it apart. They took it apart stone by stone. They were determined to eradicate all memory of the Jewish temple, to punish the people for revolting against Rome.
While the army units plundered the city, they left behind a bloody wake. An eyewitness of the Judea campaigns was the Jewish Roman historian Josephus.
The Romans were known for their cruelty, and the campaign against Judea was no exception. Josephus records a total death toll of 1 million Jews who died in the battles against the Romans. And maybe these numbers are exaggerated, but they're definitely echoing a terrible, tragic end to this Jewish ill-fated attempt to break from Roman oppression.
Amongst the smoldering ruins of Jerusalem, the Romans were careful to systematically loot anything of value. And this included the temple treasures.
If the Ark was there in the Holy of Holies, the most precious thing in the temple, they sure as hell would have taken it.
If it was hidden in Jerusalem, then it means that the Romans may have found it. After all, they were experts in torturing people to reveal any treasures that they might be hiding.
But Josephus lists the religious treasures that the Romans found within the temple, and the Ark is not amongst them.
If the Romans did find the Ark here in the Temple of Jerusalem, why is it not mentioned in any historical source? Maybe the Romans did find the Ark here. There are some less official versions, vague memories created centuries later that do claim so. And if so, is it today in Rome?
Josephus may have been unaware of the Ark's discovery. Or perhaps the Romans secretly spirited this powerful relic away. Whatever the truth, the key to unraveling this mystery may lie in locating one of the other religious treasures kept with the Ark of the Covenant. Josephus records that one of these priceless pieces was taken from the temple: the menorah.
In Torah, when we're given the instructions as to how to build the Ark of the Covenant, we are also given instructions as to how to build the menorah, which is a 7-branched candelabra. They would have had almond blossoms crafted out of precious metal, and it was to be kept lit at all times so that God's presence was indicated through the glowing light of the menorah.
We know the Romans brought that giant menorah back to Rome, and I think it's reasonable to assume if we could find that menorah, follow that menorah, we'll find the Ark.
Apart from Josephus's testimony, what other evidence demonstrates the menorah ended up in Rome? And can this explain the fate of the Ark? The Roman Forum is filled with ancient clues to what happened in this city 2,000 years ago. Archaeologist Darius Arya knows of one famous monument that can shed some light on what happened to the menorah once it came to Rome.
Vespasian and Titus won an incredible war, and with that war came spoils. And with those spoils of war, back in Rome, they built magnificent structures. The most famous of all is the Colosseum.
The fact that the sack of Jerusalem paid for this huge building, over 600 feet across, shows how much loot the Romans plundered. And another ancient structure in the city's forum details the most notable spoils of war. Built in 81 AD, 11 years after the sack of Jerusalem, this monumental arch was built to celebrate Titus's victory.
The Arch of Titus essentially encapsulates the career of Titus. So when it's constructed, he's died, he's been deified, and this is now a showcase of his grand career. So when you walk through the arch, still today, you're confronted by 2 panels. One of them depicts him as the triumphator, as a triumphing general in his chariot.
The second panel commemorates Titus's greatest victory, the sacking of Jerusalem, and the triumphant procession which followed the victory in Rome.
Clearly, these Romans are plundering huge amounts of treasures, and to us, that's quite shocking. But to them, it was just to the victor the spoils.
There is one item on this panel that is given pride of place: the menorah.
It's a very distinctive object, and instantly when you see it, you think, ah, the temple in Jerusalem.
The soldiers carry the menorah itself. Not a representation of the menorah. They're carrying the real menorah that came to Rome as a spoil of war. This religious object is really in Rome in this triumph, and it's immortalized on this particular panel.
If the Arch of Titus is a depiction of what was looted from the temple in Jerusalem, where is the Ark of the Covenant?
If you look at the front of the soldiers, you can clearly see some form of box being held up. And if you look very closely, you can see one of the Romans does seem as if he's got a pole. My thoughts are that that depicts the fact that they had got the Ark of the Covenant and they brought it back to Rome, and I believe paraded it, used it big time.
But is this detail truly a representation of the Ark?
At first glance, there doesn't seem to be an Ark of the Covenant depicted on the Arch of Titus, though there is what's described as a sacrificial table, which some people have wondered whether or not it's a table or it's a box. If it's a box, could it be the Ark? But I think the majority opinion is that it's a table and the Ark is not depicted on the arch.
I think for the Romans to use a part of the Ark of the Covenant in the Arch of Titus would have made lots of sense, right? It's a great way of showing your victory over this now suppressed people. I think the question I would have about whether that did happen is surely it would have been made a bigger fuss about.
Darius thinks that maybe the depiction of the triumphal procession on the Arch of Titus does not tell the whole story.
When we take a look at the Arch of Titus, it's not all original, because the Arch of Titus was incorporated into a wall circuit in the Middle Ages and then dismantled in the 19th century. So what you see today is largely a product, an accurate product, of restoration in the 19th century.
The Arch of Titus, like many Roman monuments in the city, was incorporated into later medieval fortifications and walls, and as a result would have been damaged.
Would there have been external relief panels depicting more of the battles, more of the bloodshed, more of the spoils of war from Jerusalem? Probably. Why do we think that? Because we look at the other arches, like the Arch of Constantine, and they are totally covered with a lot of panels. So we would expect more depictions of the wars, of the triumph of Titus.
The clues are tantalizing. The menorah and the treasures of the temple were without question taken to Rome. And if they were in the city, then so could be the Ark. Beneath Rome lies a city of the dead, the resting place of its pagan, Christian, and Jewish populations. Some of these burial places are beneath the city's most famous sites. But many miles of catacombs run underground outside the walls. What evidence is buried deep in the labyrinth of passageways that make up Rome's city of the dead?
In one of the catacombs in Rome, there's a Jewish tomb which depicts the Ark of the Covenant, and on either side there's a menorah. So it's reasonable to assume that to Jews at the time, the menorah went with the Ark.
Deep underground, outside the city's walls, is the Vigna Randonini, one of 6 Roman Jewish catacombs which link the imperial city to Jerusalem. Marco Massano is an expert on the history of the Jewish people in Rome. He believes these catacombs hold a number of clues to the fate of the treasures from the temple.
Well, when I come here, I always have goosebumps, and it's pretty dark inside, but when you walk through the galleries, you really feel the motion where people used to be buried. Now, this catacomb belonged from the 2nd century AD up to the 4th century. And the Jews arrived in Rome for the first time during the 2nd century BCE. And the second time that they came was when Titus destroyed the temple in the 70 AD.
It is estimated over 50,000 Jews were enslaved and shipped back to Rome. Could the graves of these Jewish captives and their descendants give any clues to the location of the Ark?
So it's like a labyrinth here, and you can see the locally where people used to be buried. Look, they sealed the tomb with a plaster, and on top of it, or in the side, they put a piece of marble with description of the person buried. You can see few bones left inside.
Amongst the shadows, there are details of lost lives and evidence that the Jews of Rome continued their own form of worship.
So these tombstones is very important because you can see the business of the people. And here you can read Castricius, Gram Mateus, Iulia coniuge marito benemerenti fecit. And this is the picture of the Torah. So his job was to be a writer. This is important because only in two places in the world you can see these things. You can see in Jerusalem and in Rome. That means that they maintain the Jewish tradition even here.
Could people buried here have continued to worship the Ark or the menorah? Marco has seen one tombstone engraved with a surprising reference.
Aurelia and Flavia, Jonathan Archon. So probably Archon means the one taking care of the Ark.
Might this be the clue that Marco is looking for?
Could be the rabbi, the one taking care of the Ark. The Ark means when you go inside the synagogue, there is a big Ark where we preserve the Old Testament inside, the Torah.
And alongside this mysterious reference, a familiar shape keeps appearing.
Okay, now we are inside the funeral chamber, and you can see the menorah here. So I consider this one of the most important because you can see a typical Jewish symbol. I think the representation of the menorah that we have in this catacomb is exactly the same of the menorah that the Jews saw in Rome.
This is further evidence that the menorah was present in Rome, to be seen by the people.
When the Jewish people in the 2nd century AD, they saw the menorah in Rome, of course they were very sad because for them remind the destruction of the Jerusalem temple. And this is maybe the...
But it's almost as if the Romans gave the symbol of the menorah to the Jewish people for all the wrong reasons, of course.
If the menorah was definitely in Rome at this time, where was the Ark of the Covenant? When the entrance to this catacomb was sealed for the last time in the 4th century AD, evidence for its location disappears. But centuries later, medieval sources emerged that placed the Ark back in Rome, in the hands of one of the most powerful yet secretive groups in history. One place that is mentioned over and over again in these documents is closely linked to the home of the Catholic Church, the Vatican.
The Vatican is very secretive about its knowledge, what it holds. And I've heard some amazing stories, just almost unbelievable stuff.
Ancient Rome expert Darius Arya is looking for evidence for the claims that the Ark came to Rome. The evidence from the Jewish catacombs only goes so far. But Darius believes the timeline for the Ark can be picked up again at one of the Vatican's oldest buildings.
This is St. John Lateran. It's pretty much the oldest public church in Rome. It's here because Constantine constructed it on top of pre-existing imperial property. And it's not just the church, which is so overwhelming in scale and size, but it's also the palace, the residence of the popes for 1,000 years before you have the Vatican as the residence of the popes. So in such an important church, is going to have all kinds from the Senate House in the Roman Forum. There are also artifacts here from early Christian history, such as the table from the Last Supper. And they say they also contained the remains of the Ark of the Covenant.
So was the Ark kept by the medieval popes within these walls? The first account of the Ark was made by the canons of this church.
Relics were big business in medieval Europe. I mean, every church, every abbey had relics, but obviously the Pope had to have the best.
Doubt has been cast on this claim.
Recent scholarship directs our attention to the Crusade of 1099. What happens? You get the liberation of Jerusalem. You get the reclaiming of the Holy Land, which means that Europe's attention is no longer on Rome, the New Jerusalem, but actually on Jerusalem. So the power and prestige of Rome was threatened. As a response, you make a proclamation. We have the Ark of the...
It's possible that the church's claim to have the greatest relic in the world was just a medieval marketing ploy. However, 600 years later, this church and the Ark of the Covenant were linked yet again. In 1745, Pope Benedict XIV visited St. John's Lateran and saw its relics. He ordered that the table from the Last Supper be kept for veneration. But he demanded that the Ark of the Covenant be removed from the church. Where was it taken?
As the center of papal power moved from the Lateran to the Vatican, it's more than likely that if the papacy did indeed have the Ark of the Covenant, that it followed them deep inside the Vatican.
Perhaps the Pope had it removed because he realized how dangerous it was. It may be hidden away in some vaults forevermore.
So the Ark may still be in Rome, locked away for over 250 years. Today, the Vatican denies ever having the Ark in its archives.
The secrecy of the Vatican isn't a myth. I mean, there genuinely is something called the secret archives, and that is 53 miles of shelves. So there is a vast amount of secrets. Maybe the Vatican's forgotten what's there, maybe the Vatican knows what's there and just isn't sharing it with us.
You might ask yourself, well, if the Vatican actually had the Ark of the Covenant, wouldn't they tell us? Well, not necessarily, and they would have good reason, perhaps, to keep it a secret, as many people would. And there's oftentimes when you're in possession of some sacred treasure or artifact, you might want to keep it to yourself.
Despite the rumors that swirl around their corridors, maybe the Vatican is telling the truth, and the Ark is not there after all. But there is another intriguing theory that places the Ark in a different part of Italy altogether. And this location attracted the attention of one of Hitler's relic hunters. So how was the Ark removed from Rome? And where did it go? Darius Arya has an intriguing theory for its location, which starts amid the chaos and collapse of the Roman Empire, almost 350 years after the Ark is said to have been taken.
The 5th century was a very difficult moment for the Roman Empire, particularly in the West. And one of the main protagonists that threatened Rome was Alaric the Goth. August 24th, AD 410, he's going to breach these walls that protected Rome and sack the city for 3 days and 3 nights. And this was an epic moment in the history of Rome. It hadn't been sacked in 800 years.
Even in horrendously cruel days, The looting and laying waste of Rome by King Alaric in 410 AD has gone down in history as being particularly brutal. There was hardly anybody left unscathed, any property left standing.
So we can imagine the terror on the part of the citizens, because now an outside external force has invaded the city. They're going to be sacking the city. You can think about the usual horrific pillage and plunder, burning buildings.
And this shook the empire from one end to the other as Alaric and his men went through the streets, stripped everything bare, and even took Romans and sold them into slavery.
The city was shattered. Alaric and his men had left a smoldering ruin behind. The empire that had looted most of the treasures of the known world was itself plundered. The Goths' haul was richer than they could have imagined, and may have contained a most sacred trophy.
We know that Alaric took literally tons of gold and silver objects out of Rome, and they took everything basically that wasn't nailed down or immovable. And if the Ark of the Covenant had been spotted by Alaric, there is absolutely no doubt that he would have taken it with him.
But where might Alaric have taken his sacred treasure? Having conquered Rome, the Goths headed south. While waiting for favorable weather to invade Sicily, Alaric fell ill and died near the modern-day city of Cosenza. Journalist and author Francesco Sisci grew up near Cosenza. He is certain that whatever Alaric took from Rome, possibly including the Ark, lies somewhere beneath the city.
We grew up with this idea that somewhere around us there must be the treasure of Alaric. The mayor of Cosenza was elected about 10 years ago. He's a friend. He came to me and said, we must start the search for the treasure. From the records, we know that Alaric was buried under the river Musentum, that the riverbed was diverted, then it was diverted back to hide the burial place, and all the slaves were killed to keep the secret. And in fact, it worked, because we haven't found a burial place so far.
It seems incredible, but frankly, one of the more plausible theories that the Ark of the Covenant is buried under the River Busento next to Alaric and is still there waiting to be discovered.
Many are certain that the Ark could be below the river, and the quest has even attracted one of the most reviled figures of the 20th century. Heinrich Himmler, head of the Nazi Schutzstaffel, or SS. Himmler saw the SS as a reincarnation of the crusading orders of medieval Europe. He shared those orders' desires for religious relics and sent expeditions to track down mystic relics such as Thor's hammer and the weapon that pierced Jesus Christ's side, the Spear of Destiny.
In 1938, Himmler, of all people, came to Cosenza. He stayed in Cosenza a few days. He was digging around, asking questions about the treasure of Alaric.
Himmler was intrigued by the idea that this powerful artifact could have been captured by an ancient Germanic king. He thought that if he found Alaric and his divine treasure, this would go some way to proving the supremacy of the German race. But why would the Nazis want to get hold of the Ark of the Covenant? Much like the Romans, the stories in the Bible of the Ark laying waste to armies would surely have been irresistible. And so too would be the fact that the Ark of the Covenant was sacred to Judaism, a culture that Hitler sought to eradicate. Whatever the truth, no one knows what became of Himmler's excavations. The theory that the Ark and the other treasures from the temple may be under this river is intriguing. But after centuries of erosion and water damage, these artifacts may be lost forever.
If we found Alaric's grave and we dug him up and we found with him the Ark of the Covenant, how incredible would that be? And would it still have the Ten Commandments in it?
There are numerous possibilities for the resting place of the Ark in Italy. From the forgotten chambers beneath Rome, to the vaults of the Vatican, or lying next to a king beneath the Busento River. But it may be possible that the Ark never left the Holy Land in the first place. It could still lie hidden underneath Jerusalem, or in one of the many caves of the Jordan Valley. Documents also point to it being taken to other places in Europe and even Africa. Will the quest for the Ark ever be resolved?
If the Ark of the Covenant was found anywhere in Italy, it would be staggeringly important. You've got to remember that the Ark has gone missing, basically, since the Babylonians stormed into Jerusalem 2,500 years ago. So for it to be rediscovered, it would not only prove that the Romans stole it, but it would be an epic event for Jewish people all over the world.